It's hard to believe that a year ago this month, the documentary series Let Us Pray, A Ministry of Scandals premiered on Investigation Discovery and HBO Max. I was, of course, one of the individuals featured in the series, but I wasn't alone. I sat alongside some incredibly brave and powerful survivors from the independent fundamental Baptist movement, and three of those who also happen to be close friends are joining me on today's episode of the show. We talk about the anticipation going into the series itself, what they expected the series to be like versus how it actually turned out, deleted scenes they wish had been included, the closure that they experienced through different parts of the filmmaking process, and so much more. This was a really great conversation, and I'm so excited to welcome Rachel, Kathy, and April, three incredible survivors from Faith Baptist Church in Wildemar, California, to the discussion today. Watch to the end and be sure to revisit Let Us Pray, A Ministry of Scandals, now streaming wherever you get Investigation Discovery or on HBO Max. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. We're a year out from Let Us Pray dropping. What's everybody's thoughts? A year anniversary.
It seems like it was 20 years ago, and then it seems like it was yesterday.
Well, the anxiety that we had like this time, because my Instagram and Facebook memories were like teasing that we get to announce something, but then it was so drawn out that we weren't allowed to say anything yet until we had like the green light from them. So I remember like how much anxiety we had during this time, like, oh my God, I can't wait to say something. And then being able to announce it and seeing like our faces and hearing our voices on like a commercial was just like insane. Like what a crazy feeling that was. And then it like came and went so fast. But then I feel like I need to watch it again, honestly, because like you watch it for that first time and it's like it was so well done and so good and so emotional, but like you didn't really get to like process what you just watched.
Yeah.
Like so yeah, it's just wild to look back that was already a year ago that we were in constant group messages of what was going on.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. This time last year, it was a couple of weeks before, right? When we all had that meeting on like, hey, you guys have to prepare, check your socials, you might be like movie stars. And we were all like, make sure that you have everything. So I was making sure I was like, I don't know, like if a stalker was going to come, what would they see in my house? Like we were all like trying to make sure everything was all taken care of. Nothing, it didn't happen. So
Yeah. We're
No
not movie
stalkers.
stars, unfortunately.
No.
Still.
Still.
It's funny because Rachel, your teases were like, Tara would get so mad. She's like, she's going to spoil it. Because your teases would be like, I wonder if there's any good documentaries coming out soon. Tara's like, what is she doing? But yeah, it is weird thinking about like this, because we're recording this on the 6th. So like, then closer to it, then the trailer started coming out. And then I was visiting family in South Carolina and we went into this like wing place and a commercial for Let Us Pray came on in the restaurant. And I was like, what the heck? This is so weird. I guess that kind of raises my first question, which is like, I know the filming process was so long. We sit there for hours and say a bunch of stuff. You're hoping that they don't make a really cheesy documentary. It's going to be forgotten instantly. Yes. And then B, like, is it going to accurately portray everything? What was your like biggest hope and expectation going into it? And April, if you want to start with this one, like what was kind of your biggest, like, I hope that it captures this thing when it comes out?
For me personally, like this is just my hang up personally, is like, I want to be believed, I want people to see something and, believe the story that I'm telling. And I know like years ago, there was like rumblings of different people like, hey, we like to do a documentary and stuff. And I really had a legitimate fear that somebody was going to tell a story and it's going to come off really cheesy and people are just going to kind of think, oh, these goofballs are just making stuff up or being dramatic or something. So when they pitched Let Us Pray and I listened to the people who were talking about it, I thought, these people, I trust them to tell our story. Like, I really think they're going to listen to us. It's going to be a survivor-led story, not with the goofy gimmicks and stuff like that. And so that was for me. I just wanted it, and I don't know, it probably sounds really basic, but I just wanted it to be legitimate. I wanted it to look nice. I wanted it to be professional, but I also wanted it to hear, survivor stories, and that to be the main thing, not a lot of filler and stuff. And I really feel like that came across. I think they did a good job that way. I feel like there was an outside perspective to it. Like it was told from somebody who wasn't too close into it, that they didn't get lost in the sauce. I don't know. They were able to kind of pull out a little bit and tell the story in a way that I think connected with people. I mean, I've talked to people who are Mormon, Catholic. I've talked to people who have no connection religiously, and they were able to connect to the show, which I think was really amazing.
One concern, which I think all of us were, is just trusting someone with your story, and how many, especially with how many people are involved in it and how many spider webs that connects. Wait, who's this person? How are they connected to this person?
Yeah.
And it can get very confusing, and confusing can sometimes lose an audience because there's just too many characters to kind of keep track of. And especially with how many other churches it affected, it's not just our story, it leads to so-and-so, who leads to so-and-so. And after seeing how the way that they showed that story, it made me feel a lot better. And I think that was our huge anxiety going into it, is we're watching this for the first time with everybody else, that we had no warning as to what we were going to go into. And so I was really happy to see them tell not just our story, but other survivors' story very thorough, and to bring it all together to show that this is not just an issue at Faith Baptist. It started here, but led to Faith Baptist, and then led here, and then led here. And I was really happy with the research that the producers did to bring it all together. And you got to tell the story not just for someone that grew up there, but any listener. And I've heard a lot of people with no church background find it very entertaining and interesting, and very emotional as well.
I didn't really know anything about filming for any kind of, I mean, I grew up in Southern California. That's, I guess, weird, but I didn't know anything about Hollywood and how actually things get done, and documentaries and whatever. So initially I was like, okay, they're just going to ask me questions, I'm going to answer, right? But then as you're doing it and they're like, okay, and you have this like authentic moment of like tears, and you're telling this personal part of your story, and they're like, okay, could you say that again like this? And you're like, what? Like, and you have to say it again, and then you have to say it again, and you have to say it again. And it's like, okay, is this really even like real life? Like, I feel like I started feeling like it was going to maybe not be as authentic as I wanted it to be, because you're constantly having to repeat stuff in a different way. That's like, not obviously not how you would authentically say it, because you just said it authentically. And then when we got to see the tease trailer when we were in Michigan, there was a couple of political things in there, and I'm like, oh no, are they just taking this political? Like, and I started worried about that maybe they were making this go like the political route. But after we actually saw it, which I think, Rachel, to your point of you need to watch it again, we did watch it for the first time with everyone else, because we didn't know how it was going to come together. So I think that's part of it, is that like I watched it from a standpoint of, I was sad for me. Like I cried for me. Like I was watching someone else. It was weird. But I think I was so pleased at the end that like they really kept it authentically to our stories. There wasn't a lot of, nothing actually that I can find that they took out of context or anything even like that. So it was a learning curve, I think, learning, what it takes to do a documentary, but I was pleasantly surprised at the result.
Yeah. Yeah. There was so much time between the filming and releasing that I had forgotten a lot of what I'd even said. So I feel like I was able to watch it like, what am I going to say here? What is it? What are we talking about? And I was nervous. I knew that Sharon and Sam had worked on a lot of stuff before, and she's an Emmy-winning director, so like obviously talented and had seen some of her other work. But watching that first like sizzle reel in Michigan, I was like, okay, I feel a lot better about this. And then when I saw it tagged onto the episode and you're watching it on TV and the Bible turns the page into the documentary, I was like, okay, this is cool. And then Rachel, I think you called me after maybe the first episode and you were like, it's good. It's good. Which like all the calls the day before were like, I hope it's not bad. So it was like, just like, okay, this is, they're handling it well. And yeah, like all this stuff where they're like, yeah, trim it down or say it this way. Like, I feel like they still captured kind of the heartbeat of everybody that was in it. Like, I felt like I was still hearing everybody's unique perspective. Um, I guess I, Rachel, you mentioned the word entertainment or entertaining. And obviously there's an element to that, right? Like people listen to true crime podcasts for this. They watch documentaries like this. What do you think was the line? Like that's part of the program, right? Like it's going to be on TV. People are going to watch it. I hope they find this interesting. What what did you feel was the line between it feeling exploitative of your story and being just purely like well made to where someone's actually going to engage with it? Because I get worried about that line with the podcast. Like, is this just like prying at the worst part of their life to get people to watch it? Or is it something that's actually getting eyeballs on it to serve a greater purpose? Like, what were you looking for when it came to like the intersection between those two?
So I mean, me personally, I didn't feel like exploited about anything. When I say entertaining, I think it's also because there's a lot of people that just find it hard to believe we grew up the way we did.
Yeah.
And so hearing us like talk about the rules and things like that and what you endure growing up IFB in regards to like what we wear, what we do for fun. And like to any normie, they're like, I don't like they can't understand. But then seeing it's a good reference point when like they're trying to explain, like, oh yeah, we weren't allowed to do this, we weren't allowed to do that, we had to do this. And they're like, that sounds crazy. But then they watch the documentary, it's like, oh wow, like that is crazy.
Yeah.
How you had to grow up that way. And it does sound very culty. So I think that aspect was very interesting and entertaining to an outsider because it just sounds so unbelievable that we live 20 years of our lives this way, or sometimes longer. And that and all that is outside of the sexual abuse part.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's just like your normal Monday through Friday, like without like the rape yet. So uh, so then adding that aspect, that's like a whole other like you went to Sunday school, but like I had a different experience at Sunday school. So
You had a different lesson.
yeah, very different lessons with different teachers. And so yeah, I don't know. I think that part was very interesting and entertaining to people that it was like, okay, you said you grew up like churchy. Like, I didn't think you meant like that churchy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I thought they did a good job of showing like what a little IFB or what you go through growing up, every day, all day. And so I thought they did a really good job with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they handled it respectfully too. Like there's obviously some really bizarre stuff, but it didn't
Yeah.
ever feel like my fear was like the Breaking Amish vibe where it's like here's them awkwardly going through their life, and like I think they captured that, but also were like respectful of like, oh, this is your actual life too. And like there's all these other
Yeah.
layers to it where you're at now. I'm curious for you guys because like I feel like we've all been away from it for similar lengths of time. Like none of us are like, oh, we left last year and we're figuring this out. Like I find myself when I'm sharing stories, like what you mentioned, like the bizarre culty stuff. Sometimes I have to like remind myself, like, am I exaggerating this? No, it's actually how it was, or maybe I'm downplaying it a lot. Was there anything in the interviews themselves where you felt like you had to really dig deep and like remember how weird things were when you were actually in it? Like, Kathy, did you have any moments like that when you were recording or interviewing where you're like, oh, I forgot we actually did that. That was my life. And these details did exist.
No, I don't think I had any thoughts of being shocked. I feel like we already knew we were out there, you know? Um, yeah, I don't think so. I don't remember having that thought at all. Like I feel like but now when I say something about I say, "Oh, I was raised in a religious cult." Because if you say a cult, people think something different.
Yeah. Like
Like
robes and Kool-Aid and
yeah, like weird stuff, right? But I'm not that this isn't weird. But you know what I mean?
not normal stuff like us.
When you
Yeah.
say a religious cult, it just gives a better idea.
Yeah.
I think people are more in tune of what a religious cult looks like.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. But no, I don't remember filming thinking anything like, "Oh wait, we did that?"
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anything surprised me. It's been a while.
There was some times though, because Rachel and we sat on the floor for, what was it?
Like
24 hours. It was miserable. We sat in the same space, but where we were sitting here, and the whole film crews on the other side, and they just basically would get you talking, and we'd be talking, and then at some point you could kind of catch people's eyes, like, and then you think, oh, wow, I guess that was worse than I thought. I mean, I'm telling you my story, and then you can kind of see them looking at each other, or like jotting down a note or something. And you're like, oh, yeah, maybe that was kind of bad, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so there was moments like that. You would start telling things, and you could tell they kind of wanted to lead into it because they were surprised.
Mhm.
Like, and they would even say that, like, we've talked to lots of people. I mean, they've done stuff, but they're like, man, that's pretty crazy. And then you kind of realize, wow, yeah, that was just my life. And
See,
we lived that.
I remember those moments, like
Yeah.
them being shocked about stuff and going, "Wait, what? Talk about that." But I don't remember being shocked like myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you see like the camera operator like, what? What? No, and
Exactly.
that's why I loved Sam, who was the producer on it, for listening. But like when we did those initial calls before even knowing we were going to film, like when they were just doing questions and I think piecing together their notes in pre-production, like we did a Zoom call, and I would be rattling off as much information as I could think of, and like every 2 seconds I'd see Sam like, what? And then she like, talk about that. And then she was most fixated on the goldfish thing, which I still think is so funny. That's like the biggest like scandal that people like
I
watch
thought
on
that
the
was such a weird moment in the whole thing. Like her saying like that to me, that's like the least of what we went through growing up. Was
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't even on my radar.
I know. So for that to be such a moment
I
in the
get it's
documentary
weird,
was so bizarre.
but yeah, it was definitely a funny one. And but I mean it's like a used car dealer trick from like way back in the day. Like it's an interesting one. But that one, for whatever reason, gripped the hearts of many people, was the goldfish story. Yeah, so I know we've kind of alluded to it, but watching it for the first time, what was that experience like? Do you feel like it? And I know we were all in a group chat, so every time I hit commercial break, we were sharing our thoughts very openly. But for people listening, like, did it feel like a ton of bricks? It was emotionally overwhelming. Did it feel like a relief that it's out there? Did it feel exciting? Like, what was kind of like the impact as you're watching in real time?
All of the above. I feel like there was a lot of anxiety leading up to it because it was almost a year after we stopped filming
Yeah.
because we
I think
filmed like in
almost exactly.
October.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we had been told it's coming out, it's going to come out, it's going to come out. And so like the anticipation anxiety was a lot. Then it was like, okay, is this really going to happen? I bet something's going to happen. It's not going to come out. So you're kind of doubting, but you're kind of hopeful because it was a lot of work. And you know, it's meaningful to you because it's your story. But then watching it was just so surreal. It was like, oh my gosh, that's me and that's my life. And that's like I lived through that. And I don't know. I was able to kind of like disconnect enough to watch it as if I didn't know that was me in a sense, and like just listen to the story and see. And like I was so proud when it got done. Like so proud that we of all of us that we were able to just talk so openly about it and cry and just be vulnerable. And to me, I don't know. I was so excited about it when it came out. It was hard to watch. It was difficult, but I was pleased when it was done.
Same. I was going to say it was like the most proudest I have felt of myself through this whole journey of coming forward and, going through everything we did and then ending it with the documentary and sitting there watching this and seeing these names being said on national television and not just our own abusers, but huge names, seeing Jack Hiles, seeing Jack Scott, Bruce Goddard. I mean, all of these names being said, and it was just like, it's here. The moment's here. Everybody knows now. Everything that hundreds and hundreds of people have worked towards cannot be erased anymore. And it's out there for good. And just like that feeling of like, we did it. Whatever happens from here is out of our control. We did everything that we could do to expose these monsters. And that was just such a very proud feeling.
I feel like that's exactly where I was at too. For me, like when you look at the whole span of it from the beginning, when I first time I told somebody and then talked to my dad and they talked to Bruce Goddard and there was dead silence. Like I was waiting for a phone call and nothing ever came. And I really just thought, it's just going to be put away. And then I was, they said, what do you want? What do you want coming forward? What do you want out of this? And I just said, I just want this to not happen. I want to expose the wrong. And I just want it to be, put out there so more people won't get hurt. And then obviously that just started a whole avalanche. Then, what was it, almost 7 years later, watching this documentary, and I'm just seeing like coming from a completely different angle where instead of like begging somebody to listen to me, it's almost like I'm coming to a point like I get to tell my story. I get to tell it in the way I want to tell it. And I'm coming in from a position of power and in control of my narrative. And I get to be the one to say, this is how I want my story told. And this is the audience that I want to hear it. And that audience was the whole world, I guess. I don't know how far it went, but that is pretty insane, from being basically shut out and not listened to being able to tell your story from this incredibly powerful position. And so it was, I guess the word would be like validating. It was so validating. And to just see this completely different place I was in, this growth from being just scared to say anything to anybody to being able to tell it on this incredibly public platform. And that was pretty amazing. And then I probably made a mistake. I had a watch party, so I watched it by myself. But I had a lot of other people, so I kind of had I kind of disconnected myself from it the first time I watched it. But it was really amazing to watch also other people's reactions to it. I had people there that grew up in IFB, and then I had family in town that had no connection with IFB. This was the first time they saw it, and just seeing that the span of connection from people who connected to it directly to people who just connected to it because of the story was pretty empowering too. So that was pretty awesome.
Was there anybody when the documentary is coming out that you're like, I hope that this person watches this? Like in your mind, were you thinking like, oh, I hope it's this person in the church that watches this? Was it like, I hope this demographic of people who've shared my experience? Like when you're sitting down, you're like, who were you most thinking about, like them turning on the TV and seeing your face up there?
I have kind of like
Rachel's
some different
bursting at
takes.
the seams.
I know.
To the seams.
The people I was probably most worried about were other victims, because it felt like kind of like this burden of like having to portray such a wide variety of people just with a few stories. And I wanted to do right by those people that didn't get to tell their story. I mean, even just Faith Baptist Church, we're just a fraction of the victims from Faith Baptist Church, and even our story is just a fraction of what could have been told. And so you're speaking, I felt like for hundreds of people, and that feels like such a responsibility. So I wanted people to see it, like other victims, and connect to that. So that was definitely, I was hoping that there were people out there that maybe hadn't come forward. Some teenager, the people that were being told not to watch it, that they were going to sneak out later and watch it anyways. And I was hoping that those people would watch it and connect with it. And I mean, to be honest, I really hope that John Wilkerson, Bruce Goddard, those people watch it. It's like, I know they don't, but I know they're paying attention because they're telling everybody else not to watch it. So then I'm kind of like, I'm
I
pretty
know
sure.
we've talked about this. I still feel like they've watched it. I
Yeah,
can't imagine any
they knew
world in
too
which
much about it.
Goddard and Wilkerson haven't watched it. They would never admit to watching it, but I have to imagine they did.
It's for, and I will speak specifically about Bruce Goddard because that's where I grew up. Everything growing up felt like it was so image based, like have to protect the image. And, I just putting everything on display like that. I just, I'm like curious, like I would always be curious, like how people at Faith Baptist Church watched it. I don't know, like I'll never know, but
what their
I'm
watch
curious
parties
about
look
that.
like in Baltimore.
Yes, exactly.
Rachel, who I saw you like just chomping at the bit to answer that question. Who did you hope watched the documentary?
Well, the first person that came to mind, I'm actually not going to share. I'm just not going to do that. But I mean, I do hope that Faith Baptist watched it, but the same are the people that were, on the fence, or the ones that it's just like, wait till the end, wait till the whole story is told. That we've been hearing that same rhetoric for 6 years now. But then a part of me is like, I don't think you did watch it, because if you did, why would you ever step foot in that place ever again? And if you do, shame on you. You're disgusting. So, and if they're the ones that didn't watch it, I hope their kids, when they get out of the house, watch it on their own and then never want to go back there. And that's how it's going to fail, because the old people are all eventually going to die off and your kids are not going to want to go there anymore. So that's my hope of who else watched it.
Yeah. Kathy, do you have one, or do you want to keep yours silent as well?
No. I guess a big part of me wanted all the people that, the people you felt loved you and that you loved growing up, that the minute you spoke out totally turned against you. Like, there was a huge part of me that wanted them all to watch it, because I feel like you cannot watch that and then say it didn't happen. The stories are too much the same. The rhetoric's the same. Everything's the same, right? You can't watch it and say it's fake. So there's a big part of me that wanted those people to watch it. But again, Rachel, if they watched it, if they don't believe it when all the facts are out there, they're not going to believe it by watching a documentary. So it's kind of a moot point. But what I did experience was one of my nieces watched it, and they're an adult now, young adult. They watched it and they reached out to me and were like, I didn't know. I didn't know what happened. I remember asking my mom why you were the black sheep in the family. And they said you were sexually assaulted. And I asked why, was that? Why then is she the black sheep? And then they were just like, oh, we're just not going to talk about this. And so to me, that one person seeing it and getting out of the IFB and just that truth coming out, like, that was worth it to me. Like, I wouldn't say I had hoped family members would watch it, because I really didn't care by that point if they watched it or not. But like that, one of my nieces doing that and making that decision is.
I almost, too, for me, it's almost like who would I want to watch it? It would be me. It would be me at 14 years old, doing that. There wasn't the internet like there was. I'm going to date myself. But now, like, some 14-year-old is like, man, this is happening to me inside the church. they're going to go to they don't have words for it. They're going to go searching. And that's what I did when I got older, but there was nothing for me to find. And I'm so happy now that we have just left this digital footprint behind so that somebody, if they're going through something, they can type in IFB, Independent Fundamental Baptist, abuse or whatever, and all these things are going to pop up, and that we're leaving this, Easter egg for them to find when they need it. And I'm so happy that's there. I'm so happy that that's in a search engine somewhere for somebody to find when they need it.
Yeah.
We were on vacation this summer. Sorry, Eric. We were on vacation this summer and we went to several different states in our RV with our kids. And we were in Kentucky and I was checking out at a counter, like buying something. And there was this young girl behind the counter and she was like, "You look really familiar." And I'm like, "Oh, well, maybe I just have one of those faces, And she's like, she's ringing out my stuff. And she's like, "No, you look really familiar." And I'm like, she's like, "Have you been here before?" I'm like, "Nope, never been to Kentucky before." And so she's like, "Okay." She goes, "Were you in a documentary?" And I'm like, "Yes." I'm like wearing shorts and a tank top. It's summer, Kentucky. Like, there's no way you're relating me to the IFB, right? And she was like, "I'm in the IFB and I've been trying to figure out what I really believe. And I just don't think I believe that stuff anymore." And like, she just wanted to talk. And there was like this line of customers. And I'm like, "Okay, well, I mean, you can email me or call me or what." Like, I don't know. It was very weird. It was very weird because like, you feel like people are, like people that have seen the documentary will say like, "Oh my gosh, you're famous." I'm like, "No, nobody wants to be famous for this." Like, no, no, no. But it was weird because all the way in Kentucky, like someone recognized me and then, it was just bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you said that about the digital footprint, because I was actually thinking about that yesterday, because I was looking through, people send me books now all the time for the show. Like there's a couple of publishers that just send me like any culty, whatever type of book, they send it my way. And I was sitting there thinking, like, when I was in high school questioning the IFB, the only books that I could find were like a book by the guy that did Stuff Funnies Like, and Jocelyn Zichterman's book, Why I Left the Independent Fundamental Baptist Cult. And I was like, now the fact that there's like dozens and dozens and dozens of books being written about the type of thing that we were raised in is really cool. And the fact that there's like you said, the digital footprint of like blogs and websites and stuff beyond a Stuff Funnies Like, beyond like, meme pages, it's like now there's like so many different groups. There's a documentary out, like there's so many pieces there that are available. And I also like too, April, you mentioned representing the stories of a lot of victims. And I think for me, that's obviously the biggest piece of this, right? Is like somebody watching this who is in the same experience or has been through the same experience, but doesn't know how to articulate it. This kind of gives them vocabulary and permission to do so. And that's why, like, that last scene with Ruthie in the courtroom giving that statement where it cuts to everybody was like, that's the part where I was like crying during watching the documentary, because I was like, one, I know all of you. So I was like seeing each person that I know being represented in this story, but also knowing like this is a room packed with people from across the country who've all experienced the same thing. And knowing that's being funneled into television screens across the entire country, where there's hundreds more watching or thousands more watching who probably have the same experience, was like a really cool moment. Like that to me was like, that's the perfect cap on this, to go like, and I think it kind of symbolizes like, this is just the beginning. Like the documentary ending here means like, now what's this next group of people going to be that come forward and share their story? Did you have a feeling, and anybody can answer this, but did you have a feeling when it was done of like, because I know for me, like when that last episode ended, there was part of me that was like, oh my God, there's so much more to it's like, and so there's that part of like existential dread, and then also like this great feeling of closure on that piece of it. What did you feel like in terms of like what's next, or like what do we hope happens now that this is out and we've seen this entire thing?
I mean, honestly, we could have had a season 2, season 3, season 4. So part of me, I think right away, a couple of us had messaged like, "Will there be a second season?"
And they're like,
Um,
stop bothering us about a second
I know,
season.
like we barely got this one out right now. And so I mean, it's this weird world of because how much you know. And I mean, that we talked about sexual abuse, but I mean, there's so many other abuses, financial abuse, like I mean, there's so much from massage, like you can just cover basically every base and you'll
David
hit it
Hiles
in the
could get his own
IFB.
4 episodes
Exactly.
very
And
easily. Yeah.
and some of it is very open-ended. I mean, I had people asking me like, "Well, what about Dave House? That man cannot be still out there, right? Or what about, Faith Baptist? They're still open. Why, what can we do to close them?" And it's like, "Oh, that's what we've been working on for a while here." So, and you feel like there's so much more, so many more stories, so many different avenues you can go down. So a little bit is like you put so much effort into this, and I don't want to say because you hit so many different emotions. Like you're so excited, you're so proud of yourself, but then at the same time, it feels a little anticlimactic because you're kind of like, okay, now what?
It didn't fix
So
everything,
it
like
didn't fix
it's not all
everything
changed.
exactly, and oh, we could do more, but then also being content that what you did do was enough. And kind of on that, I don't know if it's IFB. You're never good enough. You never quite hit the mark. Like anytime you hit a goalpost, it's just moved further down. And I mean, it's hard for me to acknowledge that about myself sometimes. Like I always feel like I need to do more, do more. And I was talking to somebody who's very close to this whole process, and he told me, he said, "You know what?" He said, "You girls, you really did a good thing." Like he's like, "I watched that and that's amazing." He's like, "Very few people are ever able to do that." And I'm not like trying to toot my own horn, but I always have this feeling like I could do more. It wasn't enough. And just hearing from an outside opinion, like, wow, that was really amazing. Like you guys, you did that. Like this is pretty awesome. I think I don't know. I'm kind of rambling, but I feel like all of that because I had this mixed bag of emotions like, oh, we could have done more. We could have represented more people. You know, what about this? What do we do next? That, it's a pretty amazing thing that happened with the documentary. And I
Right.
mean, honestly, probably a once in a lifetime experience that we got to experience with it. So, just kind of sitting with all the different emotions and stuff
Right.
has been a process, but I
Yeah.
think it was pretty good.
Well, the fact that it was like like 4 episodes of a documentary is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Like it's weird because like I know I mentioned before we hit record, like I can get into a cynical, pessimistic mode, especially for like 4.5 years now into doing the show. It's like, are people listening? Like, can we like make some bigger changes? Can these places
Mhm.
close down that are still open? Like, what are we doing? But taking those moments to realize like we had a 4-part documentary series that aired on national TV and was in the top 10 on Max for like like about a week. Like that's
Mhm.
pretty cool. And like you said,
It
that's like
is.
not something that happens every day. Um with all this in mind, and I'll just share my take. Like my thing that I told people was like, because everyone's question was like, what do you wish they would have added, or what do you wish they would have done? And I was like, I, the quote I've always loved forever is that perfection's when there's nothing left to add, is when there's nothing left to take away. And like I felt like the documentary series had nothing in it that I would have removed. Like it was
Mhm.
perfect as it existed. There's a billion things you could have added, but as it existed, I couldn't have been happier. And I texted
Yeah.
the director sharing that like a billion times, like, thank you for not like, thank you for doing this right, like, and doing justice to it. That said, we all have our things that we love to talk about or things that matter to us for whatever reason. Is there something that you remember saying in an interview or talking about that was cut that in your, like, if you had the Rachel cut or the Kathy cut or the April cut of this, um, that you would want included, or something you said where you're like, that was such a great line, it didn't make the cut of the documentary?
We had a whole section that we filmed with Tony, the investigator from our case, and they didn't put any of it in. And it was I know it's very personal to us, and so it might have not. They probably, they have to pick and choose what's going to connect to everybody. But it was something. I was sad not to see any of that in there because I was like, oh, and we did get in trouble because Rachel could not stop laughing during that. We kind of
It was
annoyed
weird.
everybody.
It was
No,
weird.
I agree. That was like,
But it was one of my favorite
I
parts.
agree. That was so special to me. And like, yeah, and the fact that he agreed to it and like had to get all this permission from like the Riverside County Sheriff and like change their whole like just for it to get is was really disappointing. But he's so special to all of us, and the fact that he would be so willing to talk about everything that happened and determination to put all of our abusers away. I love that they highlighted, and something that was important to me that I really wanted it to be known is that our cases didn't happen yesterday, didn't happen a year ago. This was 10 years old of investigations where any detective would look at this and be like, hell no. Like, what am I getting myself into investigating a 10-year-old rape case? Like that, who would ever want to take the time of day to do that? And he didn't just take one, he took like 3 of them. And so it was really disappointing that they cut all of that and just, his background with, he is a Christian. And so coming into investigating pastors committing crimes was a challenge. And yeah, it was, I do wish that they would have kept that in, but I get it, I guess.
I feel a little differently about that. I wish they would have included something about him and something about the investigation and just the powerful component of my crime was 30 years old, your guys' was 10, and that they got it to the finish line and convictions. But I feel like that filming with us 3 and him was very personal. And I don't know, I feel like I was happier that it didn't get aired and we get to just keep that for ourselves in a way.
Oh, that's true.
But there is
I do like that.
Ruthie and I filmed right after Paul Fox was sentenced and taken away. We left the courtroom. We went across the street to a park and filmed for a couple hours, and it was hotter than hell in Southern California. And none of that aired. None of it. And we had like really good conversations there. And so, I don't know. There was so much that could have been in it. But I also felt when it was done that you wouldn't have known there was any more that we had filmed. Like they wrapped it up nicely. The stories were complete. There weren't holes where you were like, wait, what happened to so-and-so? Like there was none of that. And so.
Yeah, there was a whole section. No, I do. And I can see like everything they took out. I can see why they did. There was a whole section. I don't even think I can really say.
But I'm like, you had to keep in the part me drinking wine and get drunk.
And Rachel's on the hot mic several times.
You had to keep that part in.
Oh man, but there was a whole part.
They're like, oh, there's that Florida girl.
Yeah, there was a whole part, like several hours they filmed at my house, and my dog was going to be on TV. I'm kind of disappointed she wasn't. They were filming my dog.
Be recognized at supermarkets everywhere. It wouldn't
I
just
know.
be Kathy,
Oh man! But anyways, they filmed several hours, and it was this whole reveal kind of thing. I'm not gonna. There was a DNA test involved, and they made me leave the house because I wasn't even allowed to see it happen. So I was waiting for it to be revealed on TV.
You've got your Ring camera in the corner, like
watching. I wanted to see the results. So I was like, man, that happened in my house, and I wasn't even allowed to be inside when it happened. And so I was waiting for it, and they cut it. So I'll never know.
The only thing, there's 2 things. So there's one like Eric-centric thing that I'm sad they cut because it was a good line. And it's when I said Jack Hyles was like the Walt Disney of fundamentalism. Like he kind of made it mainstream. And I was so sad. That's the only line I remember saying in the entire interview, and it wasn't there. But the piece that's not about me that was cut, that I totally understand why, and I'm glad they didn't do this. But being in the courtroom with the sentencing the sentencing where we were there with Ruthie, and we were all in the courtroom, and the lawyer was talking. He's given his life to God, and he was like giving this defense, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, like there was like this big sigh, and the judge was really upset because everyone made a bunch of noise in the courtroom. I wish that part was there, and I wish that like their really shaky defense of him and the judge saying like, well, you're a Christian school teacher for all this time you're abusing. Like, I don't get why this is your argument now for why you should get a lesser sentence. Like, all that stuff was so good, and the judge was amazing during that process. But I really liked and Sharon's reasoning for it. I don't know if she said that to all of us or just maybe it was when I interviewed her privately. I don't know when, but she was like, we made the decision not to. Oh, she said it on the call right before it. She's like, we made the decision not to hear his voice and not let him speak in the podcast or in the documentary. And I was like, oh, that's a really cool reason. And watching, I was really
I like that.
But I also loved what a loser he came across as in person, and the judge.
And it also just kind of gives a insight to what people deal with constantly, like the kind of reasoning. So, and like I got both sides of it, but I could see where, like, if you showed it, like, this is literally what every victim, like, nothing he said was not stuff we all had heard. Already heard dozens of times.
His voice
so
from him. I appreciate that choice.
So I definitely get the reason behind it.
Yeah. Okay. I've got a couple questions from people in the group that had, and we can just kind of rip through these. Do you feel like the documentary has made a difference in the way that the featured churches or featured people are viewed? And I guess this could be thought of like in the way they're viewed in the movement, in the way they're viewed. I mean, publicly, I feel like most people didn't know who they were until the documentary. But like inside IFB circles, or like the people that have, or former IFBers that maybe were like, oh, I thought he was one of the good guys. Like, have you guys heard anything or perceived any change in how they're viewed?
I will say, I feel like I have not seen one positive thing of Bruce Goddard since. And that I don't think anyone would even have the balls now to say anything publicly positive about him, because I feel like even people that were like some pastors and stuff that were maybe like, oh yeah, some weird accusations, but like, I don't want to get involved. After the documentary, they're like, oh my God.
Yeah. Or I don't want to be in season 2 of this. So I'm going to stay out of this.
And so I do like that like, especially like the Goddards, the Jenkins, those kind of names, you wouldn't dare associate yourself with them now just because you don't want that secondhand cancellation. So I do like that part, that he definitely made himself look very, very bad, and anyone that would even think about associating themselves, I think thinks twice now.
Yeah.
I've had a few people reach out and just say like, oh, we used to go to Faith Baptist and we didn't go very long because it was just kind of out there, and oh my God, I'm so glad we didn't go. And I've had that kind of response. I haven't really had anyone say like that it changed their mind, or except for my niece. But what I wanted to say about that was this 20-something generation, maybe 30-somethings that have access to the internet like we did not when we were growing up. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have internet. We didn't have anything. We didn't have access to any information that wasn't being given to us, which was so much easier to have control over you, right? In a cult, because we only know what you're saying and we have to believe that it's true. And this generation, all the ones to follow, have so much access that the truth is out there. And I think it's just going to make it easier for them to see through the lies. When things don't sit right with them, there'll be another place to look where we didn't have that choice. If something didn't seem right, we still just had to kind of go along with it and believe it. And so I think that there's a better chance of people not being in the IFB and the next generation. I feel like the IFB is going to dwindle over the next couple of generations as a whole. I think it already is, but I think it's going to get worse because the documentary, because of all these truths that are coming out.
My documentary part was in Wildemar, but I live in Hammond. I live right down the street from First Baptist Church. So I have definitely had people that are local go, "Oh, we knew that place felt weird." Or I ended up bumping into somebody in Walgreens and it was my 15 seconds of fame where the person was looking at me and I looked at them and they looked at me and then finally, "Were you in that documentary?" So um but they grew up in Hammond, and they said, I always knew that something was weird about that place and I didn't know. And then I saw the documentary. I've actually had that conversation happen multiple times with people that, surprisingly, for how big First Baptist Church is, they're pretty quiet downtown. I don't think they draw a lot of attention to themselves, minus the buses and stuff. And so people kind of just know them as that church that's kind of, different, but they don't know much. So I've definitely had people, bring that up locally, saying like, "Wow, I didn't realize all that stuff was happening downtown Hammond." So I'm glad for that. I'm glad it kind of shed some light, that these people who keep to themselves, it's kind of, there's more to what's going on down there than some, buses and goldfish a couple times a year. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, you had actually this would affect all of you, but I remember Rachel, you specifically talking to them during the protest at Wildemar. One of the guys that lived near the church coming out while we were doing that. And I remember you talking to him. I think they filmed that too, maybe.
They did film it, and I forgot.
I don't know where it would have gone in the documentary, but it was.
I know, but it was just it was a very emotional moment because we did the protest in front of the church and directly in front of Faith Fetch, just like in a residential neighborhood. So there's like houses right across the street, and like we're out there with like signs, obviously causing a scene. And so he came out, and I immediately felt bad that I didn't want him to think we're there for nefarious reasons.
My pessimistic side was like, "Oh, great, someone's going to come out and complain that we're filming right there." That's immediately what I thought. Yeah.
I was just worried, and I'm like, I just felt like I needed to go talk to him, and so I just like walked over real fast. Of course, the film crew ate that up real quick, and I was like, I just want you to know, like, we're not here to cause a scene. We're not going to do anything to your yard. Like, sorry for the disruption, but this is why we're here. And I was like, I don't know if you saw on the news, but there's been a lot of sexual assault coming out of this church. He's like, "Oh, I remember that." His name's Tony Chang from ABC7. He was like, "I saw him at the church or whatever, like a couple summers ago." It was all over the news, and I was like, "Yeah, well, that was us that came forward about it." And so we're just here reminding them that we're still here. We're not leaving. We're not happy with everything that went down. And he just like got so emotional and was like, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that you guys went through that. Take up my yard. You need to go to the bathroom. If they need to do it, like park it right here. Do whatever you need to do." And he was like, "We might be their neighbors, but I don't agree with one thing that they do." And he's like, "Please know, we are not on the same page. I do not support them. I am not happy with them." And like, so validating that this total stranger like gives me a hug, says he's sorry. And the people that I've known since third grade are yelling at me on the street. I'm like, wow, this was very eye-opening. Thanks, Mr. Beal, for that. Like, it was very eye-opening of like this love and empathy and I don't know, from a total stranger. So yeah, that was a very wild moment for sure.
Yeah. Speaking of people's reaction to it, I know April earlier you mentioned that you always feel like you need to do more, which I found to be true because shortly after the documentary, you're like, "Let me organize this ridiculously large protest in Indiana," and which you did amazingly. But I also know put you right in the sights of a lot of people who did not like you and gave you a lot of pushback. One person got charged for making threats against you, which is
it's still in the process. So
And
I have no contact order now. So, and then
nice.
still, it might go to trial. Who knows at this point?
That would be so crazy.
I
That's a
know.
whole another story. And then Rachel, I know you were the subject of a couple of heated sermons after the documentary came out. Um, what has the blowback been like? And do you feel like it even leaves a dent at this point, or does it kind of just encourage you to keep going? Because like I feel like it could shut you down on a certain day, but like I also feel like it's a pretty good motivator too, to be like, this is the reaction we're getting close to where we need to be.
I know for me, like having the death threats and stuff was kind of unnerving. I wasn't expecting that. I was like, oh, that's random. And it was close to home. So that was very much connected to somebody I knew personally. Like they were friends. So it was like, wow, this could be legit because this person does kind of know where I live. So that was a little unnerving. But other than that, I mean, the rest of the reactions, I'm kind of like, yay, you're a bunch of losers. You deserve to be mad. Like, if you're mad that we're exposing abuse at your church, then yay, I'm happy. So
Yeah, to me, it's nothing like, I don't know, it's nothing but noise. I mean, 5 years ago, I maybe would have shed a tear over it, but now it's just kind of funny to me. And I don't know, I'm also a little messy that I'm like, if people aren't talking bad about it, like, did we really do a good job?
Yeah.
And so I don't know, when a pastor wants to get behind his church and say a bold-faced lie about me, it says way more about him that your only way to discredit me is say, it wasn't rape, it wasn't fair with a 14-year-old, but okay. Um,
Like call it
and
what you want at that point. Like just look at the numbers in the sentence.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, all right, cool, yeah, totally had an affair at 15, like, you got me. And so I know it's nothing but noise to me, but I did feel like with the documentary, I felt like that final layer of healing that I needed, that we did this and then we did this and then we were waiting for this. And like that was like the cherry on top for that whole journey. I will say I don't think it felt like closure because I don't believe in closure. I don't think that's a thing that exists. Because that's something I'm healing from forever. So I'm never gonna get that closure. But I I got the healing that I wanted from it, and I felt like I got the final word, and that's what I wanted. And I don't know, I was pretty happy with that.
Kathy, did you have any blowback that you got directly?
I got a lot from family, specifically my sister. She's just not happy about how much I talked about everything and did the documentary because she believes that she's protecting her kids by not letting them have the truth. And I don't believe that. I believe that they can love their dad and they can, you know, I don't know. I just feel like my family's the only people that I got flack from, which is unfortunate. But that, again, to Rachel's point, it speaks more about them than me. Yeah, I think that the truth is what matters. So it's worth not having a relationship with my family if it helps somebody be able to get healing or prevent someone from being abused.
I've kind of developed that perspective in my own life because I used to really, even when I started the show, I still had relationships growing up in the church that I lost very suddenly. And even though I knew it was like not based in good reasons, like they left because of these issues, it was like, I still had that like sadness of like, oh, I lost this relationship. And my perspective has shifted so much to where like now I'm kind of grateful that like I lost those major relationships so early in my life to where it's like I can't imagine if I was like, you know, turning 30 and then now I'm realizing that this person did not care about me. Like it kind of like expedited that. It's like ripping the band-aid versus like I feel really sad when people are like reaching out to me through the podcast and they're like, oh, I'm 56 and I just realized that the church I've been in for 56 years is horrible and nobody cares about me. It's like, that's such a blow. And like, I'm thankful that for whatever reason, those things splintered the way they did, and I'm still human. So they still hurt at times, but like, I try to look at it through that perspective, like the quicker you want to show me who you are, like, please do it. I can't take a long drawn out process. So I know we're getting near the end of our time. So I'm going to wrap up on this question. It's kind of a two-parter, but I think it's important and I want to know your perspective. And honestly, I know that we talk here and there, not as much in the last couple of months, just because we have lives. Surprise, surprise, surprise. So I'm kind of curious just to get a temp check on everybody. Part one of this question is, what do you hope to see happen next in 2025, 2026, like in the next couple of years? Like, what do you hope to see happen? And that can mean really anything. Like, it could mean I want to step away from this stuff. It could mean I want to see some of these places close down. Like, whatever that means to you, interpret the question as you will. But I guess the other, like, back into that question is, with the documentary coming out, with the massive waves you talk about, with the big bursts of attention, with protests and podcasts and Facebook posts and survivors coming forward and all these things happening, do we generally feel right now more pessimistic or more optimistic about the state of things as a whole? And I can say for myself, like, I tend to steer into the pessimistic side. I feel like it can feel hard to be banging your head against the wall, like, please listen to this. But there are these stories of people that realize for the first time something's wrong. So like, I know it's a spectrum of emotions. I know that there's ups and downs, but as we're sitting here right now, what do you feel about the next couple of years? And like, do you feel overall like you're optimistic about the next, the future and what's next?
I feel like it depends on the day, honestly.
How do you feel today?
Well, I don't know. Like, I feel like each time there's a new scandal that drops, I feel like every summer or something, you see the reaction to it. And there's a part of me that's like, no one would have reacted this way even a few years ago, when their first gut reaction is like, well, hold up, let's not automatically defend him. I do feel like people have a different reaction to when a name comes out or an allegation. It used to be you immediately defend him, don't even ask the details. Whereas now I do feel like people have a different reaction to it. And I do think we have something to do with that. And I think that is going to spare the victim from way more trauma. Because coming forward and no one believing you was one of the biggest parts of my trauma. And I do think that we changed the reaction to abuse allegations coming out of churches now. I mean, personally, I think that. But then some days I still see people platforming certain people where I'm like, have you learned nothing? So, I don't know. I think it does just kind of depend on the day with how I'm feeling. But I don't know. Me personally, I felt like after the documentary, I had to just take a huge step back. And I do feel like I'm still in that step back. For a long time, I felt like I needed to advocate. I needed to help someone. And then I felt like I'm going nowhere with this. Nothing is getting done. No one is listening. No one is caring. Why am I wasting my time and energy? So I don't know. I still feel like I'm kind of there with just needing to take a step back and working on myself instead of worrying about everyone else. And it's okay to be selfish right now and work on my healing before I try to help someone else's with theirs.
Yeah.
And there's no handbook on how to deal with any of this. And I think it's a very weird feeling. Like, we had the conviction, we had the lawsuit, and then it's waiting for the documentary, and then nothing. And it's just waiting in this weird world of the dust has settled. Now you need to just move on. But this has affected so much of your life. how do you just move on? And so I don't know. I feel like I've been in a really weird place throughout last year. I'll have to say that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm right there. We did the protest, the first one, right after the documentary was really big. And to be honest, like everybody's like, let's do another. Everybody throws like, could you start a book club? Could you do this?
Everybody's
Well,
like,
I want to
"Hey,
do this.
April, can you do that again?"
I know. And part of me, and nothing, this was 100% for me. So if anybody's watching this and they feel, oh, I feel guilty, don't feel guilty. This is definitely me. But it felt like I was giving like a piece of me to everybody. And I really just did not have anything left. And I really realized that when we went to do the second protest, like I was just scraping the bottom of the barrel. And it was really hard for me to like get to a place where I don't know. It's like it was in my head. I knew what I wanted to put out, but I was kind of hitting rock bottom. So after that, if I pretty much got off all my socials, I decided, I'm just going to take a break. I need to just kind of, like Rachel said, like for us, like a lot of people look at the documentary and see it just like as a singular event, but we came forward. We had a criminal investigation, a trial, and in the middle of that, we had a lawsuit and everything that happened with that, and then a documentary. And so it has been a crazy last couple of years. And then all of a sudden it just stops and you kind of have to live. You're like, oh, like what now? All this
Yeah.
trauma I've just been able to hide behind, or all this anxiety I just kind of pushed down, now you got to kind of just confront it. So like for me, the last couple of months honestly have been kind of boring. And just it's the day-to-day boring. And I'm actually just kind of enjoying not being on pins and needles, like
You
wondering
don't
if
have
a
a call
lawyer's
with
going
the
to call.
lawyer. Yeah.
Yes.
Every
And
week.
having that feeling like everything's going to bottom out, or having any expectations, like whether it's on social media or to do anything. Like can just be with my kids, kind of live a life that I wasn't able to live for like 6 years. And it does affect your family, like it does trickle down to your life, everyday life. So ultimately, I would love, like, I think it's such a core part of who I am. I would love to be a part of something that's a little more just like permanent, whether it's like a nonprofit or something that's more of a day to day, let's make some changes and stuff. Um, I I feel like this whole thing kind of has fundamentally changed who I am. Um, I used to be kind of a glass half full kind of person, and I do feel like I've just slid into the pessimistic. It is hard for me. I mean, even like the second protest, I called about because the street name Hiles, right? Like there's a street named, actually I think it's like 6 streets. It's all this little area all named after Jack Hiles. And I went to the mayor, and all this stuff. I put out all this energy, and they were kind of like, oh, we need you to do more and more. And I'm kind of like, why do I need to jump through all these hoops to prove like this guy's a bad guy? You have everything you need.
Here's a link
Why
to
am
the
I?
documentary.
Yeah.
Check it
Well,
out. Yeah.
and he watched it. Like he told me he watched it. The mayor did. And I'm thinking, why is it always on the victims or the survivors to jump through the hoops to get people to do stuff? And so that part of me, like I do feel kind of pessimistic towards, there are, like Rachel said, it's day to day stuff. Like sometimes you just see the same themes, like whether it's just constantly on the news, you're kind of like the same themes, the same abuses, the same stories. And it can weigh down on you because you wonder how much has actually changed. But at the same time, like I'm on TikTok and I feel like the narrative has just shifted um, from when I would say my 20s, which was the beginning of Facebook era and all that stuff, to now. Like when something comes out on TikTok about another abuse, it just, people aren't this in the state of being absolute shocked or anything. It's like people believe people now. in a way that I did not see 15 years ago. And I think that is super awesome. I see a culture coming out. Like, I mean, I hear songs now, like people are writing songs about abuse and their abuses in the church. People are writing very firsthand accounts about abuse that I can relate to because it's, about or evangelical types of abuses and stuff. And I just see this whole different culture coming up that's more comfortable with calling out abuse, with saying this is my story and everything. So that aspect, like Rachel said, it like depends on the day, depends on the TikTok video I see. I think, wow, this is really good. I feel like there's a whole new culture, especially within the 20 something, 30 something crowd. I just feel like, there's hope on horizon. So sometimes I think, like if they cared, they would change. Like if they really cared about pedophiles, they would have changed that street name. And I just it gets frustrating.
Yeah.
But other times I see a lot of stuff happening, a lot of movement. And I think,
Yeah.
okay,
Definitely
it's
feels like
happening.
bursts of like, a bunch of
Yes.
things happened and nothing happened for a year. And then boom, a bunch of things happened and,
Yeah.
nothing. Yeah.
And for me personally, I would like to be a part of that. Like, I think right now I'm in my just slow, take a breath stage, but I would like to be a part of that. I would like to be, whether it's a nonprofit or something like that. I think just for me, it's
Yeah.
something I would like to see someday down the road happen.
I think I'm more optimistic, super optimistic, probably maybe overly optimistic. I started going to therapy pretty early on in the 6-year time frame, just because I pretty much had a nervous breakdown, I think. It was actually the moment when there was 2 moments, but the one that was pivotal to me was the one where Victor was in orange, shuffling in shackles into the courtroom. And I was watching it from Montana. I was watching the news and I lost it. Like I just was bawling. And it was just all these multiple emotions, heartbroken for my nieces and nephews, angry at Victor, like just all these emotions. I couldn't process it. And I reached out to get a therapist and I've never looked back and it's been amazing. So I feel like I kind of healed throughout the process at times, although I don't think you can fully heal until it's completely done. And then my court case just settled in June. So thank you. I'm newly into the process of it being done. So, and it was funny because I kept asking Rachel, when did it hit you? Did it hit you when you settled? Did it hit you when you signed? Did it hit you when you got the money? Like, when does it hit you? Because it still has not hit me. And I'm waiting. Like, okay, it's going to kick in one of these days. And I don't know what I'm waiting for, but I'm just waiting for the end of all of this for whatever reason. But during the last 2 years I've been in school, I decided to go back to school and be a mental health nurse practitioner because I'm a nurse. So I've had that to focus on. And I am going to start a retreat for women who were abused as minors. It doesn't have to be sexual, just any kind of abuse. And interesting that we are doing this podcast today, because today we talked about what we're offering this weekend on a property for the retreat. So it's like coming to fruition, which is super exciting. So I'm optimistic. I'm also optimistic because I still have some Facebook friends of people that either go to Faith Baptist or go to some of these IFB churches, and the crowds have dwindled drastically. So they'll show a picture of their ladies' conference or their teen camp, and it's so much smaller and so much more sporadic that like that just makes me happy.
Yeah, I love all these answers. It's definitely like, my feeling, and this is probably a good place to close because it kind of ties everyone in, at least from my perspective, is that even in the year, I've taken so many breaks from doing this podcast over the last couple of years, and they're always then announced because I don't know that it's coming. I'm just like, I can't do this anymore, and then it's like 3 months later, okay, I'll start doing this again. And literally after we'd finished filming, and then a couple months before, when I was literally like, I don't think this is going to come out. I feel like they just canceled this and they haven't told us. I was literally feeling like, okay, I've gotten to a really good place. I feel like my life, I don't wake up every day just feeling like thinking about IFB, like I wake up and it's like I have my own life separate from that. It's something you fight so hard to have. And and so I was like, well, I don't need to do the podcast anymore. Like I can literally I've processed this to a healthy place. And then I thought, like, how stupid. I've been doing this show where like I'm barely surviving. And now I'm finally in a position to actually start helping. And I'm gonna be like, wrap it up, like it's all done. And but I will say now, like having the show has been such an outlet to still talk about and process those things that are still very raw and real, but in an hour conversation. And then I get to go be a dad and go live my life and go have real friends and like all these sorts of things. And I wanted to say that, and the reason this all ties to all of you, it's not just to say like, oh, my own journey, but like it's one of my favorite things, even though we don't talk every day, like seeing all of you living life. Rachel, me and Tara are always laughing at your Instagram stories and like seeing you live your life and like smoking cigars in the ocean with Dan, and April, like seeing you hang out with your kids and making normal memories, and Kathy, like going through like all of these steps to pursue these career paths that are going to open amazing doors. Like, and I feel this way too. Like when I was talking to Lindsay and Chad from Shiny Happy People, it's like when I interviewed them recently, it's like we talked about the past, but then it's like me and Chad talked about movies, and the things that he's into now. And with Lindsay, it's like her incredible makeup career, and it's like, oh, you're doing like literally seeing her post stories of like this art she's creating. And it's like, I love seeing that stuff. And that was to bring it all back to the documentary. That was one of my favorite things about it is like we had a studio fly us to places to meet in person and like, sitting in a random bar in Michigan, like, and just hanging out and just talking or like being in Wildemar and like getting to spend time, like actually like getting face to face and not just talking about like, oh, all these horrible things, but like who we are now has just been so cool. So, all that to say, I appreciate the three of you. And, like I said, I know we don't talk every day, but whenever we do, I appreciate it. It means a lot to me. And I'm always happy to use the documentary or the podcast as an excuse to get you all in one room. So, but yeah,
Eric,
thanks so
I
much.
think
For doing this.
your podcast, I think it started as just an outlet for everybody to tell their abuse stories, but it has kind of evolved because a lot of your podcasts are now, it's either on doctrine and like the things we believed that were wrong, or it's evolved into other parts of the IFB that we lived, not just sexual abuse or physical abuse. And I think it's a healthy outlet because you still have to process through all of that stuff too. What you believe, what you don't believe, why you believe it, why you thought you believed something, whatever. And also I think that there's just so many more people that still need to tell their story and they need that outlet to do it.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So in other words, don't quit.
I don't plan on it.
Keep going, Eric. It's just healthy boundaries.
Like I said, I feel like that's where it is now. It's like, it feels like this is such a healthy thing where it's like, again, when I step in the room to record, it starts. When I leave, it's gone. Obviously there's still stories. Like when I do an interview where we're going deep into something, it's going to carry with you. Like you're human, you have empathy, but overall though, it's like, I don't feel like I'm ripping a Band-Aid off every time I sit down to record, which is kind of, I felt like I was just bleeding all over the microphone every time we were recording. But anyway, let's chat again soon. It doesn't have to be about abuse. That's my closing thoughts.